An angry stranger storms into a cafe, pointing fingers at Barron Trump. What happens next? A conversation so unexpected it leaves everyone questioning their own assumptions. It was a breezy afternoon in the heart of Philadelphia, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the corner cafe. Inside, the gentle hum of conversation and the clinking of cups created an inviting atmosphere. Seated at a small table near the window, Barron Trump hunched slightly over a thick book, his tall frame blending in with the crowd. Dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, he wasn't seeking attention, just a moment of quiet. As the youngest son of a former president, public appearances and scrutiny had often defined his life. But here, among strangers sipping lattes and scrolling through their phones, he found a rare sense of anonymity. Engrossed in his book, Barron was unprepared for the sharp voice that suddenly cut through the cafe's chatter. "You think you're better than the rest of us?" The voice was loud enough to silence conversations. Heads turned toward the man standing just a few feet away from Barron's table. He appeared to be in his late 40s, his face weathered, his expression fiery. His clothes, though not ragged, bore the unmistakable signs of someone who had seen hard times. His stance was tense, his tone confrontational. For a brief moment, Barron froze, not in fear, but in sheer surprise. This wasn't the experience he had anticipated when choosing this cafe for a quiet afternoon. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy, the tension thick enough to cut. All eyes were now on them. "You've had everything handed to you on a silver platter," the man accused, his voice shaking with anger. "Do you even know what it's like to struggle?" Uneasy glances were exchanged among the patrons. Some looked as if they wanted to step in. Others hesitated. Behind the counter, the barista's hand hovered near the phone, unsure of what to do. Barron, in stark contrast to the man's hostility, remained calm. Slowly, he closed his book and placed it on the table, then lifted his gaze to meet the man's. "Sir," he said, his voice steady but quiet, "I don't know what's upset you, but maybe we could talk about it." The man let out a scoff. "Talk? You want to talk? What could you possibly say that someone like me would want to hear?" The cafe fell into an eerie silence. Every patron seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would unfold next. But rather than react with defensiveness, Barron did something unexpected, something that shifted the entire mood in the room. He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed but attentive. The man's anger radiated through the space, making even those watching from afar uncomfortable. But Barron? He didn't flinch. Instead, he gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please," he said calmly, "have a seat." The invitation threw the man off balance. For a moment, the fire in his eyes flickered with hesitation. His fists remained clenched, his body tense, but the tension in his shoulders wavered. He stood there, glaring down at Barron, struggling to process what had just been offered. "Why would I sit with someone like you?" the man sneered. "You're just another spoiled kid who'll never know what it's like to live in the real world." A few patrons shifted uncomfortably, whispering to one another. The barista edged forward slightly, still debating whether she needed to intervene. But Barron? He remained composed. "Maybe you're right," Barron admitted, his voice measured. "I haven't walked in your shoes. But if you sit down, maybe you could tell me what that's like." For a second, the man seemed caught off guard. Barron's words weren't a challenge, they were an invitation. Yet instead of accepting it, the man leaned in, his voice lowering but still sharp. "You think I owe you my story?" he snapped, sarcasm dripping from his tone. "You think that'll make you feel better about yourself?" Barron's expression didn't waver. "I think everyone has a story that deserves to be heard." His words hung in the air, cutting through the thick silence. The man hesitated. The other customers watched, curiosity now mingled with an unexpected sense of hope. No one knew where this was heading, but no one could look away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man reached for the back of the empty chair and dragged it noisily across the floor. He dropped into the seat, crossing his arms defensively, his jaw tight, his eyes still scanning Barron, as if searching for a crack in his composure. "Fine," he muttered. "You want to hear about the real world? I'll tell you." The tension in the cafe shifted. Not entirely gone, but no longer suffocating. The barista relaxed slightly, lowering her hand from the phone. The patrons leaned in, pretending not to eavesdrop, yet completely enthralled. Barron leaned forward slightly. "I'm listening." And so, the man began to speak. But what followed wasn't just a story. It was a revelation. A woman, likely in her 60s, with warm eyes and a gentle smile, approached Barron. "Young man," she said softly, "what you did back there was truly remarkable. You didn't have to listen to him, but you did. And I think you reminded all of us that sometimes a little kindness is all it takes to change things." Barron gave a small nod, his expression modest. "Thank you, ma'am. I think, in the end, we all just want to be heard." The woman smiled, then returned to her table, leaving Barron alone with his thoughts. Around him, the atmosphere in the cafe had shifted. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was connection. People who had once been strangers were now exchanging smiles, striking up conversations, holding doors for each other, even quietly picking up tabs for those around them. By the time Barron stepped outside, the world felt just a little bit lighter, not just for him, but for everyone who had been there to witness that moment. One man's frustration, Barron's calm response, and the simple power of listening had created an unexpected ripple of understanding and empathy. As Barron strolled down the street, he reflected on how even the smallest actions could create meaningful change. He didn't know everything about the man's life, and maybe he never would. But in that cafe, for those few minutes, they had shared something real, and that connection had been enough to shift the mood of an entire room. Maybe that's all it really takes, Barron thought. Just a little empathy, a reminder that, in the end, we're not so different after all. But this story, it's not just about Barron. It's about all of us. The struggles we carry, the assumptions we make, and the moments where we choose to listen instead of react.